on my way to Wecota, South Dakota. You know how sometimes all small towns seem about the same? But then once in a while, one town just kind of sparkles, has something special, and admired by all the other towns. Well, Wecota isn't one of those. But every small town does have its own personality. And if you get to know a little bit more about the towns, then sometimes they can be quite interesting. Does that apply to Wecota? Well, I don't know. We'll find out. You can judge for yourself. I'm going to be shown around Wecota by David Griffith, and his wife, Kathy Miller, is going to be along, but she's requested not to be filmed. So, that is going to test my filming abilities and my editing skills. So I'm going to have to come up with some kind of plan. Well, we'll see what happens. Now, David Griffith generally goes by Griff. Not to be confused with his father, who was also David Griffith, and also went by Griff. Or his younger brother, who is not named David, but also goes by the name of Griff. Yeah.
Before all those trees were there, I could look out the bedroom window and watch the movie. This is where the movie theater was, the outdoor theater. Right about here was a slide and a merry-go-round. There was a bus taken apart, just the seating part was there. It was half of a bus, so that was a concession stand. Then he had a screen right here, Billy Nolte did. It was probably 10 feet by 10 feet. He had a projector sunk under the ground, and he'd show it up there, a little old house where he had his projector. He used to draw people from far and wide.
Really?
Oh my goodness.
Wednesday evening movie.
Did he charge?
Oh yeah. 10 cents for students and 25 cents for adults. And right here is where Pete Mosier and his family lived. Pete and Ida.
What did he do?
He was kind of a handyman. He did almost all the work inside that house, the wood that's on. He could do just about anything. I don't think he even graduated from 8th grade. He could play any music you wanted to hear on his accordion. You hum a few bars and he could go. They lived in a caboose. They had a railroad caboose, and he just put up plywood around the caboose on the east side, and one of the first room he went into had a dirt floor. And that's where he and Ida raised 4 kids in that situation. Ida actually tried to run the caboose as a restaurant. They had you know what? We always called it the caboose. It might have been a dining car of a railroad, of a train. Now that I think about it, because it had a counter and it had seats. So Wecota had 2 restaurants. I don't think either one of them had more than 2 or 3 people eating there at any one day. Over there was the blacksmith shop. Gus and Clara Marquette. Gus did the blacksmithing, and she had a little restaurant. You'd go in there to get a bite to eat, which we never did, but I was in there a few times when somebody came in to get a bite to eat, she'd say, "Oh, clear off the table," and she would have magazines and papers and everything on the table. So to clear off the table and get a place to eat was quite the task. I used to sell her baby pigeons for $10 a piece. Squab. She said, anytime you can get any baby pigeons, bring those friends in and I'll give you a dime. So I
Wow.
visit all the barns in the neighborhood trying to find pigeons so I could get some candy money.
Funny.
Right here was H&H Implement, and then the grocery store is on the corner. Here you saw a building. This was the community theater, or the community center, I guess you'd call it, community hall. But again, it was owned by Vic Holsing, H&H Implement. They just kept it up for the community. The community never paid them anything for it. And finally
Okay.
it started to collapse, and that was the end of it.
Okay.
H&H Implement had all kinds of farm equipment down there in that little recess, that valley. They probably employed half a dozen men to keep things going, repairs and whatnot. They used to claim, H&H, that they were the biggest international harvester store in the nation in terms of parts. I don't know if it's true or not. This is relatively new, but there was an older building right here where Dale Gebhard did. Mostly mechanic. Again, it was owned by H&H Implement. Didn't really thought it was Dale's. That's the post office. There was also a barber shop and a place to buy candy and pop and other treats. The back half, Hattie Raffler and her 3 kids lived. And Hattie was a holy terror, to put it mildly. We used to play baseball on the opposite lot there,
Okay.
and any time the ball would hit the wall, she'd be out there screaming at us.
Funny.
And she would never let anybody in the back room. I mean, you could not get in the back room. You know, Bob would say, "Well, come on in." "No!" she'd scream. "Nobody gets back there." I don't know how they could put 4 people in that back half. There wasn't upstairs, I guess. No windows. There might be a window on the west side there. Now it's a place for the swallows. The swallows love it. That's where Laura Holster lived.
Is it more homes?
Well, the Flanagans are the farm on the end. Max Lepke and his wife, I can't remember her name, were living there when we moved in. Max, when we first moved here, used to cut hay with horses. Cut hay and put it in windrows and stack used horses. Al Wakefield, who lived down here in 1949, 1950, 1951, didn't have a car. He'd go every place with horse and buggy. This is where Vic Holsing and his family lived. Vic and Louise. Vic also had a farm out north. They had a lot of acreage. Gene's parents. This is the house that Al Kraft bought for $3,500. About an acre of land, mature ponderosa pine trees, all kinds of lilac bushes, full basement, hardwood floors.
Who lived there before him?
Gary Holsing, before that his grandparents, and before that his great-grandparents. There was an apple tree in the back, and when the apples were ripe, every day we'd come home from school, we'd steal an apple from Gary's great-great-grandparents.
So how about this place?
Nettie Lindhorst lived there when I was going to school in Wecota. Really nice inside, but I don't imagine it is right now. There are all kinds of claims which probably aren't true. You know, the first church in Faulk County and those kinds of things. The fellow who ran the movie theater, outdoor theater, lived here.
Okay.
Elaine, Bill Nolte. This museum / school, whatever, church, was moved from the site of Emmanuel Lutheran Church. I think it went back here because whoever was president of the church at the time had this property and said, well, we'll put it back here. Oh, it is tilting a bit now, isn't it? You can't even read the sign anymore. It says something, I can still see Lutheran Church.
The first Lutheran church in Faulk County, 1896, I think.
Raised money from the Wecota Run to put the roof on. And when we were getting this ready for the first Wecota Run, we invited people to come down and take a look. Well, Lorraine Gebhard was going to do some cleaning inside. So I came down here to see what was going on. She was on her hands and knees with a toothbrush. I said, Lorraine, stop. You can't do this. My Uncle Chuck's flight pants from World War II are hanging in there. Next left, we used to have sheep. And Bob Raffler and I would go and ride those sheep like we were pretending we were in a rodeo.
Oh, sure.
And they had little horns, we'd grab the horns and jump on the sheep and they'd buck. And I'm sure Max looked out the window and said, I shouldn't let those kids do that, but he never stepped out and said, get off my property. When we hunted pheasants, we never asked anybody for permission. We went at it. You know Maxine White?
Oh, yeah.
She used to live right here in a trailer house. We first lived, that Wecota house back there, as we call it, was right up here. And there was a big barn on the same lot. And there's a road right here that went up there. You can still see parts of it. And then there were 4 or 5 homes along this stretch. And they're all gone, of course. I would say Ed Youngworth, who was the rural mail carrier, and his wife Marie had 7 or 8 kids. And I could never get in that house either. Marie would say, you stop right there. Don't you step into this house. But again, it was, I don't think they had plywood back in those days, but it was essentially just pieces of wood stacked together and had a little room here, a little room there, a little room there, and a big entry that was just full of books and boxes and trash. We lived on the far side. There are 3 small homes here. One is where Al Wakefield lived, who didn't have a car, just had horse and buggy. And I would say the area of the house, square footage, might have been 300 or 400 square feet. I don't know if he had a stove or what he had in there, but it was tiny. And then the fellow who owned the store was on the far end. Olson was his last name. And I don't know who else was in here. But the Whites moved into one of the houses, and the Rates brothers moved into one of the houses, and then they tore them all down, and now we have the Baker's place, which they've sold to Sarah and Gary something. Here's what the school was. Well, it was a 2-room country school, but we only used one of the rooms for education. The other was our basketball court. And the basketball court was one free throw area. It was probably from wall to wall. Well, it was 18 feet. And then going east and west, it was a little bit narrower than that. So that's where we'd head every recess, play basketball, almost every recess.
Wow.
The grades K through?
No, we didn't have kindergarten.
First.
So it was first grade through 8th grade. All students in one room, one teacher.
And you went there all 8?
I went there all 8. Darlene went all 8. Doug, I think, only went to 2 before they closed her down, and he went to Crestpart. So if you,
Okay.
after you graduated from Wecota grade school, you had a choice of either going to Faulkton or Crestbard High School. And we went to Crestbard because there was bus service. Faulkton didn't have bus service to Wecota.
Okay.
And I think the playground equipment ended up out at the Flanagan place. Had that typical big swing set and with the metal supports, and then the swings were all made out of metal links.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's always the claim that somebody went over the top, but we could never get there. We used to try to take the girls and give them, try to get them to go over the, never happened. Had a merry-go-round here too. And a giant stride, they called it. You ever seen a giant stride? It's like a maypole. They had the metal coming down, and you'd grab it and you'd run, and you could leave your feet, and you could go almost like that. So you get, I think you could only get like 4 people on there, and then you start running. You go as fast as you could, and then you could try to fly. It must have been dangerous. I haven't seen anything like that since.
Do they have a teeter-totter too?
We did have a teeter-totter. Yeah. Well, yeah, we didn't have running water in the school. So we had 2 outdoor biffs, one for men, one for women. And we'd haul our water from the Nolte's. Had a bucket, haul it, and then we put it in one of those Red Wing coolers. Heated it with coal and wood. So every day it was somebody's responsibility during the winter to cut the wood and get the stove all ready to go for the next day. And the teacher would get here and get things started so that we could be warm when school commenced.
But the students never had to cut any wood?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
we chopped the wood. We were responsible for getting the flag up and down every day, sweeping out the toilets, sweeping out the entryway and also the school room. A little closet, that was our library. There was also a room in the off the entry that served as a combination coal room, wood room. Bob Raffler and I. He was 11 months older than I was, or than I am, but he was 2 years ahead of me in school. He was the only person in his class, so either they had to bring him back to our class or move him up to another class. So they moved him up. So he graduated from high school like age 16.
Yep.
But we built a raft, and we went to the railroad tracks. There's no train any longer, but all the ties are still there. And we put all these ties together, tied them together, and we put it out into this pond that was there. And of course it just sunk. I mean, so we're trying to pull that thing along and it's underwater. Yeah. Neither one of us became carpenters or boatsmen. We built a rabbit hutch. We had to have 4-H projects, so we built a rabbit hutch. And we made the floor out of 2x4s. And by the time we got the thing done, and with the roof on and all that, tried to move it, too heavy for us to move.
I like the pole vault thing.
Yeah, we used to pole vault out behind the post
Metal.
office. We used pipes
Oh,
and hay. And he did become a fairly decent pole vaulter in high school. Went to Faulkton. Got a scholarship to the University of South Dakota to play football. So he was punting for the University of South Dakota as a 17-year-old. After he graduated from high school at age 16.
so is that the outhouse that you guys would use when you're playing your games and playing
Yeah,
baseball?
that outhouse is still standing. As Dale Gebhardt said, that had to be one of the best built outhouses in the country because it's still standing after all these years. And there's an old shed back there too, right next to the Biffy. There's an old Edison Edison phonograph player with all the, you know, cylindrical discs.
Yeah.
And we used to crank that thing up and play some of those old songs. But there were foundations when we moved in all along here, buildings that had been moved out. They claimed that Wecota had 300 people at one time. You can get that information from Emily's book, probably, or from Kent Gebhard. A bank, hotel, livery stable, newspaper. But when we got here, there were 50 people.
And now there's 9 on a good day?
They don't count us. They count the people who are here full time. And I guess that's 9.
Okay.
Yeah, there's probably as many dogs. There are more cats than people, I know that. When the railroad was running, there were 2 small elevators here, and there were elevators over on this side also, taking pictures. But the ones on this side were gone when we moved here. Dad, of course, built an annex and put up all the bins.
And what your house is now, is that where there was a depot?
Yeah, the depot is just to the south of the red and white house. You can still see the parts of the foundation out there. Actually, they're more like support areas. It used to be Farmers Union Elevator, Farmers Union Co-op. And it was essentially just a shack. Bill Nolte sat in that shack and took orders and then went out and delivered the bulk oil. It was probably 10 by 15. Tiny. And then Senex, of course, took over and built all this.
There's some great old photos.
Yeah, we're talking about two different buildings. Probably. Yeah. I know it was gone. It's been gone for 30 years.